A whistleblower complaint made by a member of the intelligence community is raising sharp questions about President Trump's conduct with foreign leaders. And tonight, I'll open my own notebook to start our discussion. 2 weeks ago, I stood in a windowless conference room at a hotel in Warsaw. I was the pool reporter for Vice President Pence's meeting with the new Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky, a 41-year-old former comedian and actor. The atmosphere was tense. Zelensky was bouncing his knees, and National Security Advisor John Bolton looked on, stone-faced. The tensions were understandable. Zelensky was eager for Pence to release $250 million in military aid that President Trump had held up, funds Ukraine said it needed to deal with Russian aggression. But the VP did not make any concrete promises. Instead, he echoed Trump and said Ukraine must take steps to address corruption in its country before the U.S. hands over the cash. That meeting was a snapshot of an uneasy standoff that had lingered for months, with 2020 politics swirling. According to reporting by both the Washington Post and the New York Times, President Trump's handling of Ukraine this summer, including a phone call with a foreign leader, raised a red flag with at least one unnamed intelligence official who filed a formal complaint. While the $250 million was eventually released, the Trump administration is now under intense scrutiny about whether it pressured Ukraine to investigate former Vice President Joe Biden's son Hunter, who once worked for a Ukrainian company. President Trump's lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has called repeatedly on Ukraine to investigate the Biden family. But the looming question is this: what did President Trump say in private? The Wall Street Journal reported late Friday afternoon that Trump, quote, repeatedly pressured Zelensky about 8 times to work with Giuliani. But their source did not believe the president offered, quote, any quid pro quo. Here's what he said Friday at a news conference.
It doesn't matter what I discuss, but I will say this. Somebody ought to look into Joe Biden's statement, because it was disgraceful, where he talked about billions of dollars that he's not giving to a certain country unless a certain prosecutor is taken off the case. So somebody ought to look into that, and you wouldn't, because he's a Democrat.
Joining me tonight, Kayla Tausche, Washington correspondent for CNBC, Michael Crowley, White House correspondent for the New York Times, Lisa Desjardins, congressional correspondent for the PBS NewsHour, and Vivian Salama, White House reporter for the Wall Street Journal. Michael, you're a national security reporter, White House reporter at the New York Times. What else have we learned about this complaint?
Well, we know that it involves a conversation the president had with a foreign leader, and we know that it also involves Ukraine. And tonight, the New York Times is also reporting that President Trump did pressure Ukraine's President Zelensky to investigate whether Joe Biden's son might have, done something inappropriate in Ukraine, and whether Joe Biden might have intervened. Really, the underlying facts there don't bear out the president's theory that there was something sinister going on. But we still don't have the full contours of what this whistleblower complaint consists of. Someone in the intelligence community filed a complaint, and it has multiple components to it. So Ukraine is one part of it. There's a call with a foreign leader. We don't know if that is the same thing as the Ukraine complaint. And Congress, by law, ought to be seeing this complaint by now, but is not. So another aspect of what's happening here is an assertion of executive authority by the Trump administration to keep this complaint away from Congress. So still a lot of unanswered questions, but there's a funny smell to it, that's for sure.
Why does it matter that President Trump urged Ukraine to deal with corruption and potentially to investigate Joe Biden and his family?
Well, it's very troubling for any leader of the United States to go and ask a foreign country for help, especially when that help involves any kind of interference with a U.S. election or any of the government process in general. And so for the president to have gone and requested to them to investigate or requested for them to get involved somehow in any kind of investigation that would involve his potential rival in the 2020 election, that could be a serious incident that would raise a lot of hair on Capitol Hill and potentially start, rallying a lot of people who have maybe been sitting out with the impeachment battles for this to this point to really get involved, right?
You know, since Trump took office, since he became president, we've had this phrase constitutional crisis sort of somewhere overhead from some people, but not the firing of an FBI director, not the moving of congressionally appropriated funds for a national emergency. that hasn't done it. But this, honestly, Robert, it seems on Capitol Hill there's a sense that this is in a no man's zone in the law because it's complicated, but essentially, while the law says that this kind of complaint shall be submitted to the intelligence committees, it says that the Director of National Intelligence is supposed to do that, but there's not a clarity in the law if the Director of National Intelligence thinks that it's inappropriate. So it's a real jump ball. I think this is headed to courts, and it could be very complicated.
Well, just the fact that there was even a whistleblower complaint filed formally about this call. I spoke to an official who frequently has access to these calls, and he said that, there's been some sort of desensitization over the first 2.5 years of the Trump presidency. We remember in the beginning, in the dawn of the presidency, a lot of these transcripts were leaked. There was some shock value about the casualty with which the president was conducting himself on some of these calls. That went away over time as people got to know his style a little bit more. But this official said the fact that there even was a complaint when the Wall Street Journal reported that that he mentioned this investigation 8 times, that it would have to be something that glaring to lead an official to actually raise their hand and say, I'm going to go to the Inspector General about this.
And the key question here is, President Trump, was he seeking a quid pro quo or not? Was he using his executive power in an improper way?
Exactly. Now, I'm not sure you have to demonstrate there was a quid pro quo to feel that what the president was doing was inappropriate. So one possibility is the president is hectoring and haranguing the leader of a foreign country to conduct an investigation that could damage one of the president's political opponents. And that in and of itself seems like it crosses a line, seems inappropriate.
Would that be considered election interference?
I think it could be. I think it could be. Joe Biden is a Democratic candidate. If Ukraine were to come up with information that hurt his candidacy, why not? I mean, absolutely. It would have a real impact on the race if something were to come out. The other piece of it, though, is President Trump manipulating the levers of American foreign policy, this military assistance to Ukraine, which has a kind of geostrategic rationale to help check Russian aggression, for his own kind of petty political purposes, that takes it to a whole new level. So I think even the better case scenario is pretty bad. The worst case scenario, you could see a strong argument for high crimes and misdemeanors.
Well, the Democrats on Capitol Hill are going to have to make a decision about how to proceed here. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has vowed to push Congress to review the complaint. She says the episode raised grave and urgent concerns about national security. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff said Thursday that his committee was exploring all legal options, but admitted the situation could take weeks, even months, to move through the courts. And while campaigning in Iowa on Friday, former Vice President Biden said this: I have no comment except the president should start to be president. He then issued a statement really criticizing President Trump's possible conduct on this call. What kind of strain does this cause with Congress? You already have a White House on the brink of a major confrontation on a range of issues. What does this do to the relationship between the White House and Capitol Hill?
Well, you've had Congress very split, even within the Democratic Party, in terms of whether or not impeachment is the right path forward. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker Pelosi, has been very reluctant to go down that route. And so when you have evidence like this, whether or not there was a quid pro quo, whether or not the president said, oh, hypothetically speaking, I will reinstate any aid cuts that I was going to do for your administration, anything, any kind of quid pro quo, it might not matter at this point, because just the idea of the president allegedly trying to tell them, we want you to investigate my competitor, that by itself may be enough to get some of those Democrats who are on the fence to really rally behind the impeachment clause. It's the Republicans who are going to be the question. Really move.
The phone call with Zelensky was the day after Robert Mueller testified on Capitol Hill, completing his report involving election meddling by a foreign power.
Is this a president emboldened? Is this a president who feels like he can shatter almost any norm, regardless of what he exactly said in a phone call with a foreign leader?
Well, it's certainly one of the frustrations of Republicans that if he is emboldened, then he is prone to these unforced errors. This is not something that anyone asked him to do, that he even had to do, but he clearly felt like he was on his back feet here and needed to do something about it. So that's one of the frustrations. I will say, to the point about Capitol Hill and the relationship between the White House, I do think that the White House has public opinion on its side here. Even internal Democratic polling shows that only 1 in 10 voters thinks that Congress should be spending time investigating President Trump. The news cycle moves quickly, the wheels of justice turn slowly, and we haven't really seen a lot of fruits of these labors.
Lisa was in the room for when Corey Lewandowski came to the House Judiciary Committee. Do you see Speaker Pelosi and Chairman Nadler? Are they on the same page as they process what happened with the president, possibly with Ukraine, with Corey Lewandowski and the Mueller report? What's their next step?
They're on the totally same page. No, not at all. No, they're really there. Behind the scenes, Nadler is much more aggressive. He wants to move to impeachment. And I think that Nadler and those around him, meaning his core staff, which is probably as key as anyone in these decisions, they're ready to move to impeachment. And I actually think that it looks likely that that could happen this year. However, something to bring into this whole conversation about this whistleblower complaint, there's a lot of talk about the actual substance of what the president did in whatever phone call, all of that. You have to remember, Democrats are looking at this in two layers. Even with Lewandowski, the Lewandowski hearing, they knew he was going to try and outsmart them. They knew it was going to be sort of a rope-a-dope for a long time. What Democrats are doing here is they're building a case that right now the president is obstructing justice by not giving them the whistleblower complaint, by not allowing their officials to testify. And that was part of the original articles of impeachment against President Nixon. They're making a case that obstruction is happening now because of their investigations.
What can Democrats do, or what can the Congress do to learn more, to try to find out if there's audio? Will the whistleblower testify? Are there any options here?
I would defer to my colleagues, but my quick response is that Congress can make a lot of demands, as it has been doing for months, and the Trump administration will say, that's nice, we'll think about it. No, actually, we're not going to give that to you. And then it goes to the courts, and this stuff is going to wind its way through the courts and take forever, and probably not until after the outcome of the election, I'm sorry.
Does it matter that Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, was working on a foreign policy project, perhaps with the suggestion of President Trump, the encouragement or not, but he was out there?
Of course. I mean, it's his personal lawyer who's acting on behalf of the president, so that's obviously very troubling, and he's not really hidden the fact that he was, in some capacity, going out there to perhaps make this deal on behalf of the president. He's spoken pretty honestly about it, definitely to the Wall Street Journal and to others. And so it's really a question of, maybe they'd require him to testify to some extent, but without transcripts, without a recording, it's going to be difficult. It's not just that the White House has public opinion on their side; they have the Senate on their side too. And I can't really see the Senate entertaining any idea of impeachment or anything else with the election 14 months away.
What about the Republican Party? Is this a breaking point or not for them?
Which one? The Ukrainian whistleblower?
Yeah, does the president's conduct or possible conduct...
The American whistleblower
When you
about
talk
the
to your
Ukrainian
sources today in the Republican Party, are they aghast at what possibly happened here, or are they standing firm with President Trump?
I think they wish that it hadn't happened. I think they wish that he knew the confines of the office a little bit better, or at least observed them a little bit better. I think there is a repeated frustration with incidences maybe not to this extent, but that are similar, but they understand that he is the candidate. He has extremely well-lined pockets at this point. He is gunning full swing into the election next year, and I think they are choosing to get in line.
It's tough, especially for members of the Senate Intelligence Committee, which, by the way, we talk about the House so much and Adam Schiff. The Senate Intelligence Committee is also having a hearing next week where they expect to talk to the Inspector General and the DNI, and that they're
Will the White House let the DNI come to Capitol Hill?
They're going to ask, but certainly at least the Inspector General. And so there you're going to have Richard Burr of North Carolina. You're going to have some Republicans that have been uncomfortable and had a difficult time with this president having to deal it face to face.